Our top story this half an hour, and that is the caravan crisis. President Trump now considering putting up to 15,000 troops at the border as thousands of migrants continue their march toward the U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis spoke yesterday at the Pentagon defending the president's decision.
The support that we provide to the Secretary for Homeland Security is practical support based on the requests from the Commissioner of Customs and Border Police, and so we don't do stunts in this department.
This is all coming just 5 days away from the midterm elections, and joining me right now is Stephen Hadley. He is former national security advisor under President George W. Bush and Rice Hadley Gates principal. Stephen, good to see you this morning. Thanks very much for being here.
Nice to be here.
Your take on what we're seeing. The president is upping these numbers, and he's saying that the military is going in a support role.
That's not unusual. The Department of Defense and our military deploy in support of Department of Homeland Security in a number of contingencies, natural disasters and the like. It's an appropriate use of our military. And what the president has decided is that it is important for us to be able to control our borders, and that this deployment is essential if we're going to be able to do that. So it's totally appropriate. What
is your reaction to all of these people trying to get into the U.S. right now? I mean, I know that we let in 1 million immigrants every year. Amazing that this is happening 5 days before the midterm elections. But what is the answer?
Well, you know, these are people who are coming in from Nicaragua, Guatemala, who feel, obviously, their economic motivations. There's a lot of violence down there. And these are people who are coming to try to get asylum within the United States. There is a legal process for asylum. I think what the president wants to do is enforce that process so that it is on our terms rather than on the immigrants' terms. You know, the first requirement of any country is to be able to control its borders. And this has been a problem in immigration reform for a long time. Everybody knows we need immigration reform. It's been over a decade, it's been clear. But the problem has always been giving the American people assurance that we are in control of our borders, we can prevent illegal immigration, and immigrants come to this country on our terms, not theirs.
Yeah,
that's been the problem.
That's been the problem, and it is a security problem. There are other security problems to talk with you about. The U.S. and China, for example, still looking to find common ground on this ongoing trade dispute. National Security Advisor John Bolton spoke about relations between the two countries. Watch what he said.
I remember vividly the arguments made when China came into the WTO that by bringing it into the WTO, international norms would pressure Chinese behavior, that things would change, and they would become a more market-oriented, rules-based society. Instead, for nearly 20 years, they've continued to steal our intellectual property. They've engaged in forced technology transfers. They've discriminated against foreign trade and investment. Donald Trump called them on it and said, you're not going to get away with it anymore. I'd say our assessment is that China is amazed at what the Trump administration has done.
This is pretty extraordinary. I want to get your take on it. We just had Steve Ballmer in the studio. He's the former CEO of Microsoft, and he said that 90% of the companies in China use the Microsoft platform, the operating system, and only 1% or less pay for it. He said that's $10 billion in lost profit to Microsoft. And I know this is not just an economic issue. What's the security issue, sir?
Well, you know, the overall problem is this. China was brought into the WTO. The WTO is a group of countries that are market-based economies that have transparent economies, transparent practices. Private enterprise is favored. And the thought was that it would move China in that direction, and it did for a period of time. But in the last few years, the progress in that regard has stopped. So China is now a country in which the government plays an important role in the economy. State-owned enterprises have really a priority over private enterprises, and it's inconsistent with the premises of the WTO. China has been closing its market to foreign investment and trade. At the same time, Chinese companies have been cherry-picking companies in high technology areas in our markets.
Yeah.
This asymmetry cannot last. It's not fair economically, and it's not sustainable politically. And I think whether it had been President Hillary Clinton or President Donald Trump, it was going to have to be addressed. And the Trump administration is rightly trying to address it now. And the tariffs it's using are the vehicle to try to get China to the table to make some changes.
Right.
And changes are required.
I understand. But what my question is about the security end of this, because not only are they gaining power economically, in part by stealing from America, but then they're using that economic power in their military complex and, you know, building islands in the South China Sea, putting military bases on those islands, putting military bases all over the world, by the way. So your thoughts on that? How serious is the national security issue?
It is very serious. They have used cyber as a tool for not only stealing intellectual property, but trying to steal as much as they can about our military technology. And they are expanding their investment, expanding their military, and have dramatically increasing its capability. So we now have, on the military level, a much more robust competitor than we had in the past.
Yep.
And China is a much more confident country, and it is projecting itself internationally, not only in the military sphere, but also through the One Belt, One Road initiative in the economic, using infrastructure construction, particularly to China's west, as a way of extending China's influence. But look, we've never had a potential competitor like China in terms of it's not a military competitor simply, but in terms of its enormous economic and growing economic power.
Exactly. Okay, this is a story that we're going to be on and have been on, and we'll continue to follow it. Real quick on Saudi Arabia, sir, because Turkish prosecutors are saying that journalist Jamal Khashoggi was strangled as soon as he entered the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Heightened tensions over this murder. What do you see as the future for the relationship with Saudi Arabia? What should the U.S. do about this?
It's going to be rocky. We should be very clear that this is unacceptable behavior for an adversary, but particularly for an ally. We should have some sanctions for all those who are involved in this activity, and we should be very clear that it's unacceptable. At the same time, our relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is of long standing. It's an important strategic relationship. So the point is, how can we make the point that Khashoggi is not acceptable, shouldn't be repeated, but at the same time preserve the relationship? That's the dilemma that the Trump administration faces.
So how do you do it? I mean, we know we need assistance against Iran. And you know, the Saudis said that they were modernizing. What's the right pushback? Is it sanctions? What?
I think it is, one, condemning the activity and being very clear that it's not appropriate. Two, some sanctions with respect to those that are involved in this activity, and we'll have to see where that goes. Three, something that Secretary Pompeo and Secretary Mattis announced just yesterday and the day before, that we are going to try to help Saudi Arabia by bringing peace to Yemen, which will avoid this situation where Saudi Arabia is being rightly accused for prosecuting a war that is resulting in enormous civilian casualties. We're going to try to help Saudi Arabia by bringing that war to a negotiated end. At the same time, we should maintain our underlying relationships with Saudi Arabia.
All right, we will leave it there. Stephen Hadley, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks very much.
Nice to be with you.
We appreciate your time this